Hello, everyone, and welcome to the final event in the TFMA Summer Blockbuster Series. My name is Kate Calabro. I'm a class of 2012 FMA graduate, and I currently act as the communications manager for the Philadelphia Film Society, which hosts the Philadelphia Film Festival. But most importantly, I am the treasurer of the TFMA Alumni Board. This virtual Summer Blockbuster Series was created to accommodate for the current times as a way for us all to stay connected while being apart. We truly hope that you enjoyed this series, and we look forward to continuing to connect with both students and alumni through similar platforms. It is my privilege to now introduce Assistant Professor of Film and Media Arts, Kartik Nair, who will be leading tonight's conversation.
Thanks, Kate. Thank you, Jason. Can everybody hear me okay? Well, good evening, everyone. And thanks for joining us this evening for a very special event in the ongoing TFMA Blockbuster series. This is everyone's first week back from the summer if you're a student. And whether you're on campus or off, alum or current student, I want to thank you for making the time to join us. And you're in for a treat, I can assure you. I'm stoked to have with us today the multi-hyphenate and incredibly gifted director, writer, and producer, Gary Dauberman. Gary, we are grateful and very thrilled that you were able to join us this evening. You have been busy, to say the least. Earlier this year, Gary signed a deal with UCP and launched his production company, evocatively named Coin Operated. At present, he's working as both the screenwriter and director on an adaptation of Salem's Lot. Last year, Swamp Thing, which Gary developed and wrote the first episode of for DC Universe, became one of the most critically acclaimed new web television series of 2019. Meanwhile, that same year, Gary directed his first feature, Annabelle Comes Home, which he also wrote, while also writing and executive producing It Chapter 2. The two films were also the highest grossing horror films of the past year. Indeed, Gary's films for the Conjuring universe alone, on which he has worked as director, writer, executive producer, and producer, have collectively earned, and this is my back of the envelope calculation, $1.3 billion. And I think that's in no small part to my repeated and compulsive viewings of these films, Gary. I put a lot of money into these films. And I just want to share with you a few of these moments from film. I watched Gary's Annabelle for the first time in Bombay and then again in New York, Annabelle Creation in Montreal, The Nun in Toronto, Annabelle Comes Home in Philadelphia. I watched The Curse of La Llorona on a plane somewhere over the Atlantic. Hello, my name is Kartik and I like horror movies. I like them so much, I did a PhD on them. For those of you who don't know me, I teach in film and media arts here at Temple University. I started here a couple of years ago after completing a PhD in cinema studies at New York University. I'm writing a book about low-budget horror films made in 1980s India. When Gary and I talked on the phone in preparation for this event, he asked me about these films that I'm writing about, these low-budget horror films from Bombay. I told him that though these films were popular in their time, some of the films are now lost, that the filmmakers have been forgotten. I heard an audible sigh. He was dismayed. So I sent him a copy of one of the films that has survived, and I returned to my work renewed. Gary's love for cinema is the love of a cinephile for those who have worked so hard, sometimes at the edge of possibility and against difficult odds, to make movies that thrill us, that make us laugh, and move us. Gary's cinephilia took him from Philadelphia and Temple University, where he graduated from the film department in 2002, to Los Angeles. In the years since then, he has created a body of work that spans television and the web, which shows a deep, abiding, and continuing respect for popular film genres, their histories, and their fans. I told Gary when we spoke that it is rare for me as a researcher, scholar, and academic to have the chance to talk to popular filmmakers. It is rarer still for me to have the chance to talk to a filmmaker whose work I use and cite and think through in my teaching and research. I haven't had the chance to talk to Gary before this week, but consider the ways in which his images speak to us. Because this is the thing, in the horror films that Gary has created, as writer, director, or producer, we become keenly aware of what cinema itself is. In The Nun, a young novitiate explores an abandoned monastery by an incandescent lamp. But when a faceless specter begins stalking her, we pull away, as if abandoning the nun to her dark fate. In It, Chapter 2, background space is full of possibility, drawing us into an uneasy relationship of dread with the image. If you see something, run. In Annabelle, Creation, a light bulb turns on and off, and with it a scarecrow seems to flicker to life. Cinema, this is a medium that can embalm corpses and bring them back to life, a medium that shows us something and hides other things. No wonder then that cinephiles, whether they're film theorists, critics, and fans, or filmmakers like Gary, have turned to the horror film, which takes cinema's innate capacities for reanimation and visual possibility and lets them loose on stories of the ghostly, the undead, the returned, with great sincerity and some irony. This is also what makes horror films one of the rare forms of popular culture to take seriously the questions of our mortality, trauma, and the past. Of course, these haunting films that Gary has worked on are also industrial products made up of the work of so many actors and producers, of production designers and prop makers, of musical composers and sound designers. But this most cinematic of film genres always begins on the page. And as a way to kind of illustrate this, and with Gary's permission, I thought I could show a clip from one of the films he wrote, along with some of the material from the screenplay, if that's all right. Give me 1 second, please. So this is an early moment from Annabelle, which Gary wrote. And on the right, you're going to see a page from the screenplay. And I'm going to maybe turn off my video so you don't have to look at my face. And we're going to play the clip, and I'm going to read. Unfortunately, you just have my voice. I'm going to read that page as the sequence unfolds. And then at some point, I'm going to stop reading and make the image full screen. But if you are able to make your sound as loud as possible, it'll really help with the image. Interior, master bedroom, night. Mia and John, asleep in bed. A cool breeze blows through the open bedroom window. And the closed cotton curtains billow out, almost like they're floating underwater, revealing between them the Higgins house. Next door, a light goes on as the curtains fall back into place. But another breeze lifts and we see Pete is out of bed, like he just heard something in the next room. Sharon sits up, curtains fall, breeze. Both seem concerned, which is when Pete leaves the bedroom to investigate and curtains fall. Jumped.
John? John, wake up.
What is it? Is it the baby?
No. Next door, I heard a scream. I think something's wrong.
Stay here. I'll go check it out.
John, wait. Shouldn't we call the cops?
Because you think you heard a scream? Just let me go check it out. They do the same for us.
If they heard me scream, I'd rather they call the cops.
Think they heard you scream.
Just be careful.
I will.
John?
Oh my God, you're covered in blood.
It's not mine. It's not. Go back inside and call an ambulance right now. Go!
I need an ambulance. 307 Gardner Road. Yes. I don't know, but there's a lot of blood. Please, just be as fast as possible.
I love the self-conscious Americana of the film, its blend of historical accuracy and disturbing unfamiliarity, the citation of a period and its films, in this case of the 1960s and of Rosemary's Baby and of Halloween, the choreography of on and off screen space. These and other moments in Gary's filmography, especially including Annabelle Comes Home, I hope we can talk about today when we talk about his creative research and other processes. So to discuss his career with us from the page to the screen, please welcome Gary Dauberman. I'd like to call this event Gary Comes Home. He comes home to Temple's Film and Media Arts program, where a new generation of talented and sharp minds are honing their skills as filmmakers, whether in the screenwriting BFA or the directing BFA or the media arts BFA, or have come over to the dark side to join me and my colleagues who do film studies, or otherwise being mentored by Jeff Rush, Iran Price, Afia Nathaniel, our many brilliant mentors in screenwriting. So without further ado, let's get, I want to kind of use this moment to welcome Gary into the conversation. I think I told Gary this yesterday, that I think of this conversation with him as him inviting us into the artifact room in the Annabelle films, you know, where all his ideas sit and we kind of work through them. So on that note, everybody, please welcome Gary, and we can start the conversation. It's my prerogative as the person running this, Gary, to ask the first question. Okay.
All right. Thank you so much for that intro. That was really, really well done. Thank you.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure. It was my pleasure. When you look at that sequence today, and we put up the page from your screenplay, and my sloppy reading of it, and then the images on the left, what do you recall of the process of writing it? And as you think, I think you told me this, in very little time, no, Gary?
Yeah, I wrote that movie in 12 days. So, you know, honestly, the first thing that comes to mind is, you know, I would go to, I had a, you know, my son was like 4 at the time, and my daughter had just been born, or was about to be born. And so I would go to Starbucks on Ventura Boulevard, and I'd show up when it opened and I'd leave when it closed, and would just sit there all day writing. So that's the first thing that comes to my mind. And you know, I did that for 12 days straight. And just for context, you know, I was a huge fan of The Conjuring. I saw a very early cut of the first Conjuring, and I was a big fan of it. And a big cheerleader for it very, very early on. Not that it needed cheerleading at all, but just from, you know, I was working for New One at the time on other things, and they brought me in, and I met with James and Juan, and I was just like, you know, it's rare when you're watching a movie and you just feel like you're watching something that I knew my kids were going to watch 20 years from now. And I've said this other places, but it just, you know, Conjuring felt like an instant classic to me. Even though it's a very classically told haunted house movie, we just hadn't seen that for so long. We were just coming out of this, you know, you know, another era that James ushered in with Saw, which was like more of that splatter, you know, more gory type stuff. the Splat Pack or whatever they called it. But then, and then, you know, but so we hadn't seen it in a while. So something that felt very classic suddenly felt new again. And they had, you know, it came out that summer and it was this big success, and they were going to make a sequel, but they were starting to think spin-offs, and they came to me about Annabelle, and they said, you know, we're thinking we want to make a movie of this next year. Would you like to write it? And I said, yes. And they said, okay, we need it in 2 weeks, because this was October, because they wanted to start shooting in January. And that's what we did. I wrote it, and then, you know, it immediately got greenlit, and immediately started to, you know, sort of the train left the station, and you're sort of writing to catch up. But so I think about that. I think about, as I was watching it, I was thinking about, you know, so often when you're writing a scene as a writer, you're really hoping the director takes what you wrote and elevates it, and comes up with things that you don't, you just don't have the real estate on the page to write. You know, so, you know, for instance, I saw one of the questions, like, you know, someone asked about the librarian in It, when she's behind you and then she looks and turns to the camera. You know, those are moments that you find on the day. You don't write that stuff. Sometimes you do, sometimes you don't. But for that particular moment, you're just writing on the day. And like, you know, Andy's a guy who likes to take a ton of takes, and, you know, James does a lot of takes. And what they do is they try things out, right? So you don't think about that on the first take or the second take, on the third take. On the fourth take, you're going like, you know what? Why doesn't she right back there? Just have her turn the camera on this take and see if we like that. And then it happens, and you're going, oh, holy shit, that looks great, right? So really, you're looking for moments like this. What brings me to this is, like, really John Leonetti, of this director, really just took what I wrote and did a really nice job just you know, putting it to, you know, sort of directly translating onto the screen. And for this sequence, I'm okay with that. I like that. I think it works. You know, for the most part. You know what I mean? Like, it's I was, it was cool. I was happy because it's early on in the movie, and it sets the table, for tension wise and all that stuff. So
No, I think it was, thank you. And Gary was kind enough to share the screenplays. And I was reading through, from all three Annabelle films, I was struck by the level of detail for visual description and atmosphere in a genre that we think relies so much on that, but that we don't assume automatically belongs on the page, and that we think comes at the level of editing or production design or sound. But even, for example, your description of the curtains as diaphanous, I thought was incredible, and it has this play with theatricality and showing and hiding. So thank you for that answer. Should we get started? Sean Kiley asks Gary, what do you do for a living directly after college? Do you work on smaller independent projects initially, or something else while trying to get your foot in the door?
No, what I did was, you know, I was lucky enough to be part of the Temple summer program at some point, where we stayed out here in LA, and I interned for a little bit. And what that told me was, and when I made some connections, the most important thing it taught me was I could come out here and live. I could exist out here. I can figure it out. You know, it got me familiar with the city and stuff. So right after I graduated, I was working as a waiter outside of Philadelphia, and I saved up money, and then I graduated in December, and then I moved out here that following September. And after saving up money, and then I came out and tried to do, you know, it was harder to get it was so hard to get a table, a server job out here and a bartending job out here, because everybody wants to do it. But really what I did was, was a cater waiter for a while, where I looked for other, jobs to, a bartending job or a server job. And I did that. And then what I did was intern during the day. So I would find places that necessarily didn't really need the college credit. They were just I was like, I'll work for free. What do you need? And I ran into the woman who became my first manager. Her name was Catherine James, and she's notable for a lot of things, but she's one who, she discovered Quentin Tarantino and Roger Avery, and we just hit it off because she was a fan of movies like I was, and she, you know, she's just like, I love old Hollywood, and she was, you know, she dated Steve McQueen, and Jim Morris, you know, she had all these great stories. So I would work for her for free during the day, and it exposed me to how writers work, what managers do. They, you know, writers would send in their scripts, I'd read them, I'd be exposed to scripts that were, you know, specs that were going out in the industry, and I could read the competition. I could see what I was up against. And then at night I would wait tables, and then if I had it in me, I'd go home and write after that, and then I'd get up and do that. And I didn't do the internship right away. That was more of a sort of epiphany of, I realized all the people, you know, when I would go out at night and all that side, I realized all the people that had jobs and careers and were at home sort of working or honing their craft. So it was really important to just sort of, you know, just really put social life and all that stuff aside and just, you know, focus on the work, which is what I did. And then after the management thing, but what getting the sort of the management sort of internship was, when I wrote my first spec, I had someone to take it to. I made that connection. So I took it to Catherine. She read it. She really loved it. And this was around the time of, it's such a love letter to Big Trouble in Little China and those 80s movies that I loved. I mean, fucking love letter. It's a complete sort of ripoff in a lot of ways, but it was around the time Shaun of the Dead had just come out. So it's got that kind of vibe to it. It was a horror sort of comedy. And it got me my first agent. It got me meetings with executives and all that stuff. And that's kind of how that sort of, you know, got the ball rolling, at least, you know?
Yeah, that's great. There's a question from Sean Aversa, and I think it kind of connects with the previous one. What advice would you have for aspiring screenwriters about to make the jump to LA on making connections and finding jobs? And I know you've spoken to your own experience, but as you've been there now long enough, have you seen shifts in the industry that might be helpful for us to know about?
Have I seen shifts in the industry? I don't know. You know, when it comes to writing, I don't know. I don't know if I've seen shifts because it's been so sort of tied up in my own stuff. But like, you know, I think writers, you know, they're so concerned about. I think one of the things writers have to get good at first is finishing things. You know, there's so many writers who are worried about, well, what happens when I get page 70? What happens when I get page to, you know, or should this happen on page 45 or 50? Or it doesn't matter right now, just finish it. And then you can take a step back and look. But I've discovered a lot of writers have a real hard time finishing things. And I realized early on, as I was reading writers when I was working for the manager, for Catherine, and I would read scripts, man, there are so many talented writers out there, so many talented writers, and a lot more, so many writers, way more talented than I am. But I can't control that. You know, what I can control is how hard I work and how much work I put into it. And I realized if I could just finish something, it would put me ahead of the game, you know, because 90%, 95% out there just, you know, I'll send it to you when I'm done. They never finish it. So, yeah, that's one of my big things. It's, and then it's also, you know, there is a networking component to this. There is a social component to it. And that's not like, you know, it's not going to bars and all that stuff. It's just, you know, reaching, you know, not sitting at home all the time and not making those sort of personal relationships with people who want to do the same thing you do, or you know, linking up with people who also want to get into the industry and all that stuff, and finding the right people who are actually putting in the work too, because there's a lot of people out, you know, who say, yeah, I want to do it, and then they you know, they don't put any effort into the craft or anything, you know.
Yeah, that's a really useful answer, and I think it's a good segue into a question from Adam. What helps you get into your creative workflow when sitting down to write a movie? And just going off your previous answer, do you have writing buddies? And what's happened after COVID in terms of your writing process? Has it gotten better?
No. It has not gotten better. I do not have writing buddies. How do I, hey, Adam, how do I start my workflow when I sit down? That was it, right?
Yeah.
It's a lot of procrastination. It's a lot of, I'll do the crossword puzzle. I'll screw around on Reddit. I'll, see what, is, lurking on Twitter. But I work best under pressure. So, I'm fortunate that people give me deadlines and stuff. So it's like I have to turn things in at a certain time. And sometimes I hit them. Sometimes I'm a little late. Most of the time I'm a little late. But, if I turn in is okay or good, then people forget that you were a couple of days late or, a week or two late. But I also use Mac Freedom, which turns off my internet. And then I just free write on a blank page in my script. Like I won't start, like the first thing I write is usually in all caps, and it's just like, all right, what's this scene gonna be? Literally, I'm writing these questions, like thinking out loud on the page. And then eventually it gets into something where it feels like I'm actually writing the script and not just yelling at myself to get it done. And then that's how I get the ball rolling on that thing. And that's generally how I start most of my days with, by yelling at myself.
So Adam, you can yell at yourself.
But Mac Freedom, yeah, Mac Freedom is a great tool. And I've spent a lot of times in a lot of coffee shops because it keeps you honest there as well. Mm-hmm. Now COVID, you can't do that. And the writing has slowed down because it's just not a very inspiring time at all. And and for a while it was like, what's the point of me finishing this on time? Like, what's the, who knows when we're going to be able to shoot it? You just start to get down on the world, but things are picking back up now. So now it's,
Okay, that's great. Actually, I wanted to follow up on that. I think when you and I talked, we also talked about how you think the pandemic might bring about a resurgence in the horror film. I mean, I think I remember some part of that conversation, and there are two questions, one from Saber and one from Mitch. And Saber asks, what's it like to work in the horror genre? And did you originally intend on working in that genre? I know you gave us a little bit of a history of your love for the 80s. And then Mitch asks, are there any differences in the writing style when writing a horror movie compared to other genres?
Okay. Yeah, I always wanted to write in the horror genre. I always gravitated towards that stuff when I was a kid. And I think growing up in Delaware County, and Philly, it just feels like I grew up around ghosts for some reason. Just all that old, rich history that really always affected me. And I just love that stuff. But I also love, I love all kinds of genres. I'd love to write a Lethal Weapon. I'd love to write a True Lies. I'd love to write, I love those big action movies too. But I always go back to horror just because I love it. I don't think there's a different, writing movies. It doesn't matter what you're writing. It's all about finding moments, right? So if it's a comedy, you're trying to find that right comedic moment. If you're writing horror, you're trying to find that right scare moment. And I've noticed a lot of writers really rush by those moments. And I think there's a way on the page you can really dig into those moments and have the reader slow down and realize, oh, okay, this is going to be a movie moment. Like people want to read, when executives are reading a movie, they want to be able to pick those moments and go, man, that's going to look great in the trailer. I know that's not the most artistic thing to say, but it's true. It's a business as well. And they want to look at things and go, man, that's a moment. That's a great line for this. Like they're thinking of that stuff. And they're not, and it's not just, but they're being moved by it too, one hopes. So I don't really find much of a difference between, I haven't written a comedy, but I do write some humor stuff in my, it has a lot of comedy in it, and you're just writing, jokes, and hopefully people laugh, but I don't think about, it's, my process is the same no matter if I'm writing a funny scene or a scary scene or whatever. Yeah.
No, that's great to hear. And by the way, I watched Annabelle Comes Home Again last night. It's pretty funny. It's funny. That's a funny film. And I think there's a kind of openness to the form. But I was also just thinking about this. We talked about this over the phone also, that I remember films in terms of moments, right? So
Yeah.
in terms of moments of intensity, and that's the definition of cinephilia. I mean, the French film critics in the 50s, when they were watching all these Hollywood films, often they didn't even understand the plot, but they would remember these kind of visually popping or stylistically brilliant moments. So I think there's those film producers are also cinephiles. Okay, so we have a question from Nick. When translating a novel to film, what is your process to ensure you stay true to the book's narrative, but also make smart decisions as to what can be cut out? How do you add new elements to an existing work?
My first step in sort of adapting a book is really trying to be as literal, almost as literal as I can to the book. And then I do this every time, even though I know the end result will be there's way too much material for a movie. But it helps me kind of discover what moments that I think are really working for a movie and what moments you can lose. There's one of my favorite books. There's so many great sort of detours into these characters' backstories and lives and stuff that, you wish you could get on screen, but, you can't. The movie's already 2.5 hours long. So, you got your core group of characters that you have to serve. So those are, while painful cuts as a fan, they're easy cuts to make as a filmmaker, because you go, there's just no way. And you can allude to things, but I think you just can't, the puppies in the refrigerator and all that stuff, like losing, you just know you're not going to get there. And that's probably probably for the best for that particular one. But I always try to remain true as much as I can. And then so I write with the book next to me. And then after I get kind of a draft, or I kind of don't even get to the end because I already know it's going to be way too long, I'll put the book away and almost I write by memory. What moments stick with me, And then it kind of starts to feel like I'm finding my way into the movie. And that's just been my process. And everybody's got their different process. That's just been mine. And then you add moments that you just, there's things that I don't want to take some books. You have it's got a great concept and the book's terrible, so you're just you feel like you can have more creative license and freedom to really sort of address things. And other books like Salem's Lot, I feel like, well, if it's not broke, don't try and fix it. So you just you kind of try to stay as true as you can.
That's really great. And I'd like to follow up with Aidan's question. I think it's kind of connected, and perhaps particularly when you're working with Stephen King properties. How much say does the writer of a film actually get once it is picked up or once it begins filming by producers and directors, or in this case, Stephen King?
I'm sorry, how much does a writer?
I mean, yeah, I think the question is how much you get to hold on to what you wrote on the page in the kind of creative struggle of actually turning it into filmed image, and if that's something that's an important struggle for you, if you know what Aidan's question means. I mean,
yeah, sure. I've been fortunate to work with a lot of great directors, very generous directors. And for most of the movies, I've been on set for a lot of it. So, and I am, I am by no means Aaron Sorkin or Quentin Tarantino or anything. So I don't feel as precious about my dialogue. They've got such great rhythm and stuff. So if if we're on set and we're just hearing something that's not just coming out of their mouth that great, we'll change it. I think ad libs are great if you can figure that stuff out. I haven't had any, I think, it had a lot of my stuff. Chapter 2, I was off doing Annabelle Comes Home, so I wasn't on set, but so there was not a lot, but stuff that changed, that, you just kind of have to live with because they're there and I'm not. But I feel like as a writer, I've done my job. I've turned in a script that everybody likes. Everybody got the movie made. there's a great quote that I don't remember. I'll paraphrase. It's like the writer's the first person to care about the movie and the first person to stop caring about it. So it's like, there's part of that where you're just like, all right, go with, and then you have to kind of hope that someone's gonna. But again, most of the time, I've been brought into the process as a writer from soup to nuts. But there have been occasions where it's like I just haven't been able to get there, or mostly it's just that I haven't been able to get there. I mean, there's been no one who's been, a pain to work with or anything.
And also, I think this is maybe a subject for a different conversation, but someday we could talk about your own philosophy of fidelity to what you've written and how that's been shaped by the fact that you are already sometimes adapting the work of a different author. And so if you understand that translations have to happen, perhaps that also informs your philosophy of how people might be translating your work going forward. We have two questions, one from Alex, and one from Cameron. Cameron asks, when writing horror, how do you balance the scares with moments of character or narrative that propel the plot forward? I think we kind of touched on this earlier, but if you want to expand.
How do I balance with character? Well, what helps actually is for instance, in the Conjuring franchise, we shoot the movie, we edit the movie, and then we start doing these little 100-person screenings. And that's really, really educational, because you're sitting there and, much like when you're watching a comedy, like horror is a very audible, you can tell when an audience is really into it or not, and man, when you're sitting there and you have a character giving backstory about why they're this way, and the audience is just like kind of back in their chair and they're going, and they're, sighing, or they're shifting in their seat, you're going, this is just, and you're like, all right, they want to get, let's start trimming this a little bit because they want to get to the next thing. And it's really kind of shaping it. We do a lot of shaping to those screenings, because you just can, they set up a camera in front of the audience, and you can see their reactions. You can see them checking their watch. You can see them, oh man, they completely didn't like this, or so that helps in finding the balance. And then, it's also your internal compass. Like I don't have a fast, I know there's some writers think, well, every 10 pages, something's got to happen. I'm not necessarily like that. If anything, I'm maybe a little sooner, but if I find myself being bored writing the scene, there's no way anybody else is going to be excited by it. I try to, it's my own internal sort of, hoping I can, it's almost like, I would imagine it's kind of like when a musician hears a bum note, you know what I mean? Going like, oh, that's out of tune, I got to tweak that. It's kind of when you're reading your own stuff, you go, oh, that doesn't hit right. Or it feels like this is going on for too long. We got to get to the, I don't know, the drum.
And you find, that's so interesting. And you find that you're a good judge of when you think the scene is.
I didn't say good. I didn't say I was a good judge. I just said I'm my own judge. Yeah.
That's great. We have a question from Alex, who is interested in writing thrillers and wants to know, do you have any go-to styles or tricks for priming tension in the audience, or is it a new discovery process for you each time?
It feels like like every time I sit down to write a new script, I go, oh shit, what am I doing? It's like, what am I doing again? And then, it's how do I do this? It always feels like I'm a beginner every time I start a new script. One of the ways I find myself really trying to get the most out of the tension on the page is I write it as if I'm watching the movie. There's a lot of writers who will describe it as if it's already happened, or, they'll write it in a big paragraph chunk. And I think it's not the best example, but the page that was put up on screen, it's a lot of white. Yeah. Each moment is like one line, because that's why I want that. I don't want that to be rushed. I don't want that when someone's shooting it or the actor's reading it or trying to perform it. I do not want that moment to feel like, oh, it's just going to be a quick little thing. And I feel like psychologically, if you read like something in a paragraph, you're going like, oh, okay, this is just going to be a little thing. But if I extend it on the page, they know this moment's really going to be sort of drawn out and increase the tension. So that's something I really I use quite a bit.
That's so great. That's Alex. I mean, that's something that I think is so striking. The idea of just using the typography of the page to guide the person who's actually going to film it or act in it to pause and deliberate.
Yeah, I mean,
that's produce it.
yeah. It's you know, that's Walter Hill, that's E.E. Cummings. That's poems, like poets, like reading poetry really has helped inform my writing as well. Just like they really guide your eye and all that stuff and how it looks on the page. And I will sometimes like E.E. Cummings, like I will move a word and put it over here, so your eye literally has to travel to get to it. Just to try to whatever I can do to help sort of get as much of a moment out of it.
And I will say to everyone who's listening, reading Gary's screenplays is reading something very literary. There's a lot more in there. And if Gary gives us the permission to, perhaps we could share just a few pages at some point.
Of course.
With the attendees here. Okay, we're moving on. Dylan asks, do you block out your story before writing? Or do you get ideas as you go?
Do I block out my story before writing? Yes. For I do not do note cards or index cards. I do essentially kind of like an extended sort of outline, slugline outline kind of thing, or and I'll have a separate document where it's just me, free writing on the page, going like, okay, well, first act's probably going to be this, midpoint's probably going to be this, and if I don't know my midpoint, what's my midpoint? If I don't have a midpoint, then is my first act wrong? There's moments that I want to find, like my opening. I need signposts. So usually that's my end of my first act, my break into act 2, finding my midpoint, and then finding my break into act 3. And generally that informs what my third act's going to be. But I'm not precious about adhering that because that always changes once I get into it. But I do not, I don't beat out every scene on a big whiteboard or index card thing, because I find, for me, that's just another form of procrastination for me personally. It's not, it's just, I get caught up going like, wait, what color should my index card be for this scene? And it's plus or minus. So what I'll do is I'll just go, I know it's going to take place in a car. So I'll write interior car night. Don't know what happens in this scene, but it's, this is going to be a scare moment. So maybe it's something like this, and then move on to the next scene. Do that. And then start to dig out what the story is.
Yeah, that's great. I hope that helped, Dylan. Alina has a question. How did your experience at Temple University help prepare you or shape you for your career and the success you've achieved?
Well, Temple was, again, like I talked about that summer program, which was invaluable. It exposed me to a lot of films and a lot of different ways of filmmaking that I wouldn't have otherwise, which I find really useful. It was also useful because, it's like, Christ, I talked to these guys who went to USC or those movies, and their short films are $60,000, and you're going like, really? Like, it's like, no, you strap the, when we did it, it was like, put the Bolex on a shopping cart and use that as a dolly and all that stuff. But that way of thinking outside the box, which I think Temple really fosters, is really important, especially, Annabelle, the first one was a $5 million movie. So you're just trying to think, well, I know it can't be, I know I can't have the car chases or explosions or whatever it is, and it helps you think in different ways. Whereas I think some of these other schools, you're already coming into, you don't know how to scale down in a lot of ways. So I think Temple really shaped it. I could do a whole host of things where it's, which really helped me. So, and it really is just about, it also helped me, I will try and fail. I'm not scared of making a wrong turn, and I think, again, exposing to those different filmmaking techniques and those different filmmakers really helped me sort of foster that as well. But yeah.
Yeah, Gary, can I push you on that? So, because it will be beneficial, I think, for them to hear. Being exposed to a diversity of film, being asked to watch, I'm assuming, all kinds of film was formative. And since you work in a genre that's so cinematic, looking at kind of non-classical, non-Hollywood examples probably helped. And when we watched that sequence from Annabelle, I thought it's so resourceful just in terms of camera movement. That's priming audiences so much more than anything that would cost a lot more for probably less effect. So could you talk a little bit about, if you wanted to, about the kinds of films you may have watched here that you thought were formative for you?
Yeah, sure. One of the, and I always go to, I don't always go to because no one's ever asked me this, but like there was when else was I going to watch history? The Passion of Joan of Arc, things like that really like, holy shit, like captured, it made me, that series of images, it made me very uncomfortable. And I didn't experience that until I went to Temple. The German Expressionism stuff that I really wasn't hit to before I went to Temple. I'm still trying to get, like, I fell in love with film noir there. And all this stuff is different styles of storytelling that I can use to inform my filmmaking and my writing. Just even noir and German Expressionists and stuff really got me thinking about light and dark. Yeah. And I love that stuff. I still love that stuff. The slats over the face, all that stuff really, you're just, the more you expose yourself to, I just think you'll have a wider pool of things to draw from when you're, for inspiration, I mean, a lot of people who just watch a specific thing, and when you read their stuff, it just feels like that specific thing. Yeah. So for me, that becomes a little bit boring,
That's great. No, and when I think of, Maria Falconetti's face in Passion of Joan of Arc and how close the camera is, and I was thinking of, I watched, when you begin Annabelle, the first thing you see actually is just a quarter of the face. You're not supposed to be this close to a subject's face.
No,
that produces kind of an ambient disorientation. And also just because, German Expressionism, film noir, all these styles, they were the B movies of their time. And now they're the most definitive styles.
I mean, the Annabelle shot I stole from the first it's a flip of what James did in the first Conjuring. But like, there's a moment in Annabelle Comes Home where, what's her name? Katie's the actress, but I forget her name in the in the movie. But she's coming down the stairs, and the
Judy.
What's that?
Judy?
No. Fuck. Anyway, she's coming down the stairs, and the artifact door opens behind her. She hears the clack, and she stares right down the barrel of the camera. And I remember, like, even Katie was like, "You want me to look down the camera? You want me to look at the camera?" And I was like, "Yeah." And I was like, "Yes." And the producer's like, "Really? You want it?" Because it's not really, it's like in a horror movie. It kind of breaks the fourth a little bit. But, that's a very noir shot. Like, just kind of that guy just looking right at the camera and the sweat on the face, It's also one of my favorite shots in It's a Wonderful Life with Capra does it, when Jimmy Store's like, "He'll go with Potter if you don't." And he stops and he looks at camera and I was like, "Man, I just want to do that here." And so.
Yeah, thank you for reiterating the importance of film history to everyone here. Okay, I know we're running towards the end of our time, but just a few more questions, just one last question perhaps. Maybe this is a fun one. Joseph White asks, do you think this current horror boom will last? And I know you have some thoughts on this, Gary.
Do I think this current horror boom? Yeah, it doesn't, I think horror is cyclical in terms of what people want out of horror. So I think we're maybe coming out of Supernatural. I think people are going to still go, but I think people seem to want more visceral violence right now. I think slasher I hope is going to make a comeback. So I think in that way, but you look at it like, horror, late 90s, it was, I Know What You Did Last Summer, it was Scream. It was still, those were successful movies. Started 2000, it was The Ring, it was The Grudge, like big movies. So, it's been going on for quite a while. I just think it's going to change in terms of what the audience wants and responds to. But so yeah, it just seems like, and also I think times of times of great strife in our country, horrors always seem to be on the rise as well, as sort of like the audience is really looking for this sort of cathartic release. So I think that'll our times sort of reflect what we kind of watch and stuff, and I think
Yeah.
for better,
So, yeah. So is that your promise that you're not going to abandon the horror film, Gary?
No.
Because we're looking to you. On that note, I'd like to invite Kate back into the conversation. This has been great. And Kate, if you wanted to just take over.
Mac. Thank you all for joining us tonight, and thank you to Gary and Kartik for that wonderful conversation. And thanks to all the students and alumni that submitted questions. I just want to let you all know, please follow TFMA on Facebook, as well as if you're an alumni, please join the TFMA alumni group. That's where you can learn about all upcoming events that we're doing like this. And until we meet again, please stay safe and go Owls.
Yeah, thanks guys so much. I really enjoyed it. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Gary. Bye.